Welcome to another episode of Two Pastors and a Plant. I'm Drew Narmore.
I'm JD Shaw.
What we like to do here every week is engage in topics in the Bible, sometimes in culture, and just talk about truth in a short amount of time. And this week, I wanted to talk about a movie that came out fairly recently on Netflix called The Social Dilemma. A lot of stuff in that movie that I've been thinking through for a long time. I read a book called Disruptive Witness, and I've engaged in this topic for a while. But that movie, of course, that medium, the documentary style like that, especially with the people that they had on there, marketing directors of believe Facebook and other big tech companies. It was really, pretty powerful in a way that maybe a book or an article wasn't. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of those things that were pretty, alarming, and see how we, our culture can handle this, especially through, a spiritual framework. So one of the things, I think the biggest takeaway I had was just how manipulated we are and don't realize it. That was pretty jarring to realize, that is true of me. And the whole I was talking about, Cracker Barrel the other day, and the fact that it popped up, promoted message on my feed wasn't a coincidence. And there's a real manipulation behind all the algorithms that sink us deeper into the social network, and then also isn't healthy. I mean, that was one of the big points about why those guys left those tech companies, was because they realized what I'm doing isn't good. The algorithm that I'm created isn't good. It used to be on Twitter or Instagram where the only things that popped up was the most recent posts from the people you followed, which is not the case anymore. And so I've noticed even a difference from when that came into a little bit of a cultural effect, but also especially on me, a personal effect. So what do you think about that manipulative effect that social media has on us that can really dig us deep into this hole?
Well, I haven't seen the whole movie, but I saw the first 20 minutes, I think, and so I'm perfectly competent to talk about it since I saw 20 minutes of it. But I have read a lot on this issue, and the one thing I remember from the movie was how these former executives at Google and Facebook and Twitter said, "You are the product. You're the product, and we are trying to manipulate you in such a way so that we can guarantee to our advertisers they're going to be able to have access to you by, like Drew said, putting in front of you exactly what they want you to see." Of course, I think it's unhealthy, and I think it's not a good place to be when you're just being constantly manipulated like that. It creates a distorted view of reality. And we see that in the polarization of our country now. I mean, our country's always had political differences, but I think it's safe to say those differences have hardened to a degree we haven't seen since the Civil War.
Definitely. And
everybody agrees that social media has been a huge driver of that hardening. But it's not. But there's also a personal mental health perspective.
Right.
So the Atlantic Monthly a couple of years ago, I can't remember the title of the article, but I saved it and read it more than once, talked about the effect of social media on the mental health of teenagers in particular. And I've seen this in my own life with my family. But they said that because of social media, teen pregnancy rates have plummeted. Well, let me back up. I think they said beginning in 2007, teen pregnancy rates began to plummet, but incidents of major depressive episodes and suicides began to skyrocket also in 2007. And what happened in 2007? The iPhone came out. And so it isolates you, which makes it really hard for you to get pregnant, but it also isolates you, which makes it really hard for you to have a good mental health. So that's even apart from the manipulation. That's just the reality itself,
Right.
of being in your room with the door closed, staring at a phone, just doing this all the time. The warped sense of reality isn't also just from the advertisers either. It's from what we see in our actual social networks. Our friends on Facebook. This is why I got off Facebook 8 years ago. I was on it for about a year, and I just couldn't handle this, what I'm about to tell you. But it creates such unhappiness because what we are seeing when we see our friends' social media feeds is a highly curated view of their lives. Because, what do people put on social media? They put their most recent vacation. They put their most recent DIY project.
Right.
They put their children's award ceremony. But nobody gets on there, and no sane person gets on there and posts a video of the screaming fight they just had with their wife. And so you get this, it created in me this really unhelpful feedback loop of my life stinks because it's not this uninterrupted stream of successes going onward and upward. But instead, my life, what was really happening was I was seeing the reality of my life, but I was not, the real life relationships I had were being overwhelmed by this curated version of relationships that any sane person would put on social media, but it's not helpful.
One of the other parts that stuck out to me was the idea that social media is a big slot machine. You probably didn't get to that part in the movie.
If it was past the 19th minute, probably not.
But
definitely not.
It's this idea of every time you refresh your feed or bring up your feed, there's some sort of effect in your body, hormones, sort of that has the same effect of a slot machine. You refresh it, and maybe there's something good. Maybe there's something that I'm missing. Maybe there's something I need to see, and that'll keep me there, entertained, laugh. For me, I just want to laugh, and I guess what can that do? I know you're not trained professional in this way, but like what can that do to you?
Well, I'll tell you one other. I think the most ingenious thing about the iPhone are those little red numbers that pop up on your apps.
Yep.
Because they grab your attention when you've got a new email, a new text, a new message in your group me.
Yeah, one of the things they said to do was to turn off your notifications.
And when that happens, it creates a little endorphin rush.
Right.
Because somebody's talking to you. And just like the like button on Facebook or the retweet button on Twitter. And it keeps you hooked. It keeps you into that system because it feels like our bodies are wired in such a way so that it feels like a personal validation every time we see one of those notifications.
So where do we go from here? It's hard to talk about this and not sound like it's, from Satan and it's going to ruin your whole life. You need to cut it out cold turkey. Right. I was more convinced than I ever have been that's the answer for me, is to cut it out cold turkey. But you don't want to sort of go all the way on that side and say you're not a healthy Christian if you look at social media. So how do you have a healthy approach with this? I mean, it's a difficult question. There's a lot to it. It's probably not a blanket answer that you can apply to everybody. But how should Christians approach this?
Well, there is no blanket answer. I can tell you what I've done, but I don't know if that would be helpful for anybody else. But I'll answer that two ways. Just first, for the individual Christian, you've got to be aware of what's going on every time you grab your phone, every time you log on to your social media account. You have to be aware that you're being manipulated. And I think if you're constantly reminding yourself that I am seeing what somebody else wants me to see of reality, it's going to lessen the impact. That alone will help. And then for some of us, it just means don't get on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at all. Don't get on MySpace at all.
Check.
I'm not in any danger there. Napster, don't get on Napster. But that would depend on person to person. So just individually, just educate yourself. And certainly, please do not get your news from your social media feed. Probably the best thing, this is the one recommendation I will say, is deliberately subscribe to at least a couple or three different news feeds, whether through email or subscribe to a magazine or something like that, from different points on the political spectrum, and read that as your news, and don't let social media, or for that matter, a 24-hour news network, have complete control over your perception of the world, because you will get a distorted perception of the world. And we are not to be deceived as Christians. We are to take captive every thought and demolish strongholds. And when you refuse to do those two things, you're allowing yourself to be ensnared in the devil's schemes. The second thing I'd say is just for Christian ministries.
I was gonna ask a question about the church.
Yeah.
Where does the church speak into this? And it almost feels like, for me, it's like this is the big new issue that the whole world is dealing with, and we need to be talking about this a lot. So how does the church minister to people about this?
Well, I think the mistake a lot of Christian ministries make, are pastors, churches, parachurch ministries, evangelistic ministries, is they are really worried about their social media presence. And they think that through social media they're going to have a greater impact than they will. They would never say this, but I think their actions belie their belief that they're going to have a greater impact for the kingdom of God by putting more and more resources into social media, as opposed to what ministries have traditionally done: just teach the word to flesh and blood human beings. And even if you're only getting to do that, my first church if we had 40 people on a Sunday morning, that was a banner day at Montpelier Baptist Church. But 40 people on Sundays, and pouring your resources into that, as opposed to 10,000 followers on social media, you will have a greater impact for the kingdom with the people than with the friends, the social media friends. And so it really troubles me how much Christian ministries seem to be constantly pouring resources into that. Now, you could accuse me of being a hypocrite, because what are we doing right now? But, I wouldn't say we're pouring resources into it. These are just conversations that we're having anyway, and this is the most practical way we can get our church around it. But we're not promoting this outside of Grace Bible Church.
It's not driving the ministry.
No, I mean, this is just a little adjunct to what we're already doing. So I could feel like we can do it in good conscience, but I've just seen so many pastors become enamored with how many followers they have, and I get a bad feeling when I see that.
Well, thanks for talking about this issue. We will be, obviously, talking about this more. This is something that is going to be, practically taught on a lot in the future. And, I guess I would recommend that show. I'm not exactly sure what it's rated, so I'm always kind of hesitant to recommend it. But it's at least a pretty helpful resource on this topic. So thanks for watching. I would recommend, I don't have the book with me, but I would recommend Disruptive Witness. Is a great book.
We've got it in here somewhere.
We've got it in here somewhere. I can't see it, but it is a great book that came out a few years ago, and is a good resource if you're wanting to read more about it. That's a good start. So that's all I've got. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.